The month is almost over. Your salary only landed recently, and yet you open the app with that familiar sinking feeling, not because you want to, but because you need to know. And there it is. The direct debit went out at midnight. £1,100, 1,200, maybe more. Rent. And the number left in your account is smaller than it should be, because it always is. Because rent doesn't care what else happened this month. Rent doesn't care that the boiler was making that noise again, that the car needed tires, that your energy bill went up in April. Rent just goes. Every month. On time. Without fail. Here's what I want you to sit with just for a moment. That money is gone. Not spent on something you own, not building equity in anything, not earning a return. Gone, straight into someone else's asset. And the person receiving it, their net worth just went up. Yours didn't move. That's the thing we need to talk about. Let me describe something that I think a lot of people in this country are living right now, and not fully naming. You work. You earn a salary that by any reasonable measure should be enough. Maybe it's 28,000. Maybe it's 38,000. Maybe it's pushing 45,000. And yet, every month, by the third or fourth week, there is almost nothing left. Not because you're reckless, not because you're buying things you don't need, but because the fixed costs of simply existing in Britain are now consuming a proportion of take-home pay that, a generation ago, would have been unthinkable. You're paying rent, private rent, because the council waiting list is years long and you earn too much to qualify anyway. You're paying council tax on a property you don't own. You're paying energy bills on a boiler you have no right to upgrade, in walls you're not allowed to insulate, through a prepayment meter you didn't choose. You're paying contents insurance because you have nothing else. You're paying full price for the water, the broadband, the TV license, all the infrastructure of a home, in a home that belongs to someone else. You're paying to live somewhere, and the person you're paying is building wealth. And here's the thing that doesn't get said enough. This is not a coincidence. This is the structure. This is how the system is currently designed to work. Because the renters I'm describing are not people who made bad financial decisions. They're people who graduated into a housing market that had already moved away from them. They're people who saved a deposit and watched it become insufficient before they could use it. They're people who earn the median full-time salary of this country, around £39,000, and discovered that it is no longer enough to get a foot on the ladder in most of England. They're people who are working, fully, properly, and still falling behind. Not falling behind people who are richer, falling behind the house they live in. So here's what I want to answer today. Not should you buy or rent. That's a personal finance question with 100 variables and no universal answer. The question I want to answer is this. Can renting in Britain in 2026 become structurally more expensive than owning? Not just emotionally, but financially and mathematically. And if it can, what is the exact mechanism that makes it so? Because I think most people who rent feel the answer in their gut. They feel the asymmetry. They feel the quiet wrongness of paying more in rent than a mortgage would cost, while the person they're paying watches their balance sheet grow. But feeling it and understanding it are different things. If you understand the mechanism, you can make decisions around it. If you just feel it, you stay stuck. Let's understand it. 4 numbers, that's all we need. But let them settle. The average monthly private rent in the UK is now around £1,381. In England, it is around £1,438. Let me translate that. The UK median full-time salary is around £39,000. After income tax and national insurance, that's roughly £2,650 a month in take-home pay before pension contributions, student loan deductions, or other workplace deductions. Average private rent across the UK is around £1,381. In England, it is around £1,438. That's roughly half of take-home pay gone before you've bought a single bag of shopping, before council tax, before energy, before anything. The average first-time buyer house price to earnings ratio is around 4.7 times income on some lender measures. But on the official England affordability measure, the median home costs around 7.6 times the median annual earnings of a full-time employee. That means even on the more generous first-time buyer measure, the average home costs nearly 5 years of your entire gross salary. On the official England measure, it is more than 7 years of median full-time earnings. Not your savings. Your entire salary, before tax, before rent, before food, years of it just to own the property outright. And in London, Oxford, Cambridge, and other expensive parts of the country, the ratio is significantly higher. Almost 1 in 4 British adults cannot cover an unexpected expense of £850. Not a major emergency. £850. A boiler call-out, a car repair, a week off, sick, with no sick pay. Almost 1 in 4 people in this country are one unexpected bill from financial crisis, and renters are disproportionately represented in that number because they have no asset to fall back on, no equity to release, no remortgage option, just the overdraft, the credit card, or the choices nobody wants to make. Average total household debt, including mortgages, is around £67,350. And here is the connection that rarely gets made. And the part that matters for renters is not the mortgage debt homeowners carry against an asset. It is the unsecured borrowing that many households rely on when income cannot absorb shocks. Renters, people with no housing equity to release, are more likely to borrow to cover costs that owners may be able to absorb through savings, remortgaging, or the flexibility that comes with owning an asset. A leaking roof becomes emergency savings for an owner. For a renter, it becomes a maintenance request that may or may not be answered, and in the meantime, a damp flat and a direct debit that doesn't stop. 4 numbers. Every one of them is describing the life of someone you know, possibly your own. Now, there's a story we've all been told about renting. It goes something like this. Renting is flexibility. Renting is freedom. You can move for work, you don't have to worry about maintenance, you're not saddled with debt, and you can save while you wait for the right time to buy. That story was told in good faith. In some markets, at some times, parts of it were even true. But in Britain, in 2026, that story has curdled. And the people it's curdling for are the ones who believed it most completely, because flexibility only has value if you're exercising it. Most private renters in Britain are not moving for opportunity. They are renting because they have no alternative. They are renting in the same postcode, same kind of property, same kind of landlord arrangement, year after year, not by choice, but because the deposit gap has become unbridgeable while they've been paying rent. And here is the cost of that flexibility. Every month you rent instead of own, you make a payment that builds zero equity. Zero. It does not reduce a debt you're working off. It does not accumulate in an asset. It is, in accounting terms, pure expenditure. Gone. Meanwhile, every month a mortgage holder makes a payment. A portion of that payment reduces the principal. The debt shrinks. The equity grows. Slowly at first. Then faster. And property values over the long run in Britain have risen significantly above inflation, so the mortgage holder is effectively making a forced savings contribution every month, one that compounds into an asset. The renter is not, and after 30 years, the owner has a paid-off house, or equity they can release, or an asset they can pass on. The renter has 30 years of receipts. This is not moralizing. This is not blame. This is what the numbers produce. Let me show you the actual mechanism. The cog inside the machine. When you pay rent, the money travels in one direction, from your account to your landlord's. Your landlord uses a portion of that rent to cover their mortgage interest, which is lower than your rent because they got the mortgage at a time when prices and rates were different, or because they borrowed against existing equity and their loan-to-value is low, or because they own it outright. The rest of your rent is profit, and that profit, combined with the increasing value of the property itself, grows their wealth month by month. Now here is the part that is almost never explained clearly. Rents in Britain are not priced at what it costs to provide housing. They are priced at what the market will bear, which means they are priced at the maximum a tenant will pay to avoid homelessness or a degraded alternative. That is not a landlord being evil. That is basic supply and demand in a market with severely constrained supply. But the effect of it is that renters systematically pay a premium above the underlying cost of housing. In many parts of Britain's constrained market, private renters can pay as much as or more than someone with an equivalent repayment mortgage on a comparable property, especially where the owner bought earlier or borrowed at a lower loan-to-value. The renter may pay a similar amount, sometimes more, and builds nothing. The owner may pay a similar amount, sometimes less, and builds equity. But it goes further than that. Because renting doesn't just cost you the rent itself, it costs you the investment you cannot make. If you own a property, you can insulate it. You can fit a heat pump. You can make energy efficiency improvements that reduce your bills permanently. Your investment in the building belongs to you. If you rent, you cannot do any of that. In many cases, you're legally prohibited from it. So you pay higher energy bills, often on an older, less efficient property, indefinitely. The inefficiency is locked in. You can't fix it because you don't own it. This is what economists call the split incentive problem. The person who pays the energy bill, the tenant, is not the person who could fix the energy problem, the landlord. And because landlords are not paying the energy bills, they have limited financial incentive to invest in efficiency. The result, renters disproportionately live in lower-rated properties. And lower-rated properties cost more to heat. And heating costs have gone up, and renters pay all of it. There is one more layer to this. When you own a home with a repayment mortgage, your housing cost is more bounded than rent over the long term. Yes, rates change on remortgage. Yes, maintenance and service charges can surprise you, but the principle is the principle. Every payment can move you closer to owning more of the asset. When you rent, your housing cost is entirely at the mercy of the market. And the market, in most of Britain, has moved in one direction for 20 years. A tenant who signed a 12-month tenancy in Leeds in 2019 and renewed it every year since has seen their rent rise, in many cases, by 30 to 40%. Their salary has not risen by 30 to 40%. That gap, that growing gap between what you earn and what shelter costs, that is the mechanism. Let me introduce you to Priya. Priya is 33. She's a Band 6 nurse at Leeds teaching hospitals. She earns $36,000 a year gross, actually slightly above the median, and doing genuinely important work for the NHS. She rents a one-bed flat in Headingley, £875 a month, which, by Leeds standards in 2026, is not extravagant. That's just what one-beds cost now. Priya has been meaning to buy for 4 years. She saves when she can. She has about £14,000 in a lifetime ISA. She checks Rightmove every few months, watches prices, runs the numbers, and keeps arriving at the same conclusion. She's close, but not quite there. 1 more year of saving. Maybe 2. Here's what those 4 years have cost her. Not in regret, in actual money. 4 years of rent at an average of, let's be conservative, £800 a month, because rents were lower when she started. That's £38,400 gone, not saved, not invested, not reducing a debt, just paid to her landlord. Her landlord bought the flat in 2011 for £95,000 on a buy-to-let mortgage. That flat is now worth, conservatively, £160,000. In 4 years of Priya paying rent, her landlord's equity increased by roughly £12,000 just from price appreciation, not including the mortgage interest Priya's rent was covering. So, in 4 years, Priya paid £38,400. Priya's net worth gain from housing, 0. Her landlord received £38,400. Her landlord's equity grew by approximately £12,000. This is not a scandal. It is how the system works. It is perfectly legal. But it is worth understanding clearly, because Priya is not unusual. Priya is millions of people. And here's the thing about Priya's £14,000 lifetime ISA. The government bonus helps. She's done the right thing. But the deposit she needs for even a modest property in Leeds, 10% on a £160,000 flat, is £16,000, plus stamp duty, plus solicitor fees, plus the survey. She's still 2 to 3 years away, and in those 2 to 3 years, rents will continue rising. The deposit target keeps moving. The clock keeps running, not because Priya is doing anything wrong, because the structure of the system creates this outcome systematically for people exactly like her. Let's put actual numbers on the full picture. I want to show you what renting for a working life costs, not just financially, but in terms of the position you end up in. Priya is 33. Let's say she rents until 55. That's 22 years. Current rent, £875 a month. Let's assume rent increases at 3% a year, which, if anything, is conservative given recent history. At 3% annual rent inflation, by year 1, she's paying £875 a month. By year 5, just under £1,000 a month. By year 10, around £1,140 a month. By year 15, around £1,320 a month. By year 22, around £1,630 a month. Total rent paid over 22 years at 3% annual increase, approximately £320,000. £320,000. In 22 years, Priya will have paid well over £250,000 in rent. And at the end of those 22 years, she will own nothing. Not a share in a property, not an asset. The receipts, that's it. Now let's look at what happens if Priya buys at 33. Same property, the £160,000 flat. 90% mortgage, 25-year term, at a realistic 4.5% initial rate. Monthly mortgage payment, approximately £800. That's less than her rent right now. But we need to be honest here, because this is Britain and this is a flat. That means the mortgage is not the whole cost. Priya may not be buying a freehold house, she may be buying a leasehold flat. And with a leasehold flat come service charges, building insurance, management fees, reserve funds, sinking funds, and sometimes major works bills that arrive with very little warning. A modest service charge might be £1,000 a year. A more typical one could be closer to £2,000 or more. In some buildings, especially older blocks or buildings with lifts, cladding issues, fire safety work, or major repairs, it can be much higher. Over 22 years, that matters. 22 years of service charges could easily remove tens of thousands of pounds from the advantage of buying. Add conveyancing, mortgage product fees, estate agent fees when selling, insurance, possible ground rent on older leases, and the number is no longer as clean as rent versus mortgage. And interest rates matter too. The numbers change if mortgage rates stay higher for longer. A 4% average over 2 decades is not a promise. It is an assumption. If rates average 5 or 6% for long periods, the monthly pressure is higher and the advantage narrows. So let's not pretend buying is magic. It isn't. Buying a leasehold flat carries real risk. Service charges can rise. Buildings can need work. Major works bills can arrive at the wrong time. Selling can cost money. The property may not grow exactly as expected. But even after all of that, the core mechanism is still different. The renter pays and owns nothing at the end. The owner pays, takes risk, absorbs costs, but gradually turns part of that payment into equity. That is the difference, not a guarantee, a structure. Over 22 years, she makes mortgage payments. Rates change on remortgage, and service charges can rise, but let's use a cautious central assumption of an average mortgage rate around 4 to 5%, while remembering that this number is uncertain. By age 55, her remaining mortgage might be approximately £25,000 to £30,000, depending on the rates she actually pays and whether she ever extends the term. Her equity could be approximately £130,000 before any property appreciation. At conservative 2% annual growth, the property might be worth approximately £245,000. On paper, that could leave her with roughly £215,000 to £220,000 of housing equity before selling costs, service charges, and any major works are considered. But that is not the final usable number. Once you account for service charges over 2 decades, buying and selling costs, mortgage product fees, insurance, and possible major works, the practical advantage may be much lower. It could be tens of thousands lower. In some buildings, even more. But it is unlikely to be zero. Net position at 55 on the renter path, 0 housing equity. Total paid out, approximately £320,000. Net position at 55 on the owner path, substantial housing equity on paper, but with real ownership costs that must be subtracted before you call it wealth. Same income, same city, same job, same person. The difference may not be a clean £200,000 after every cost. British property is never that clean, but the direction is clear. Renting leaves Priya with receipts. Owning leaves Priya with an asset, minus the very real costs of owning that asset. Not from investing in the stock market, not from a side hustle, from one decision about housing direction. That is the number this video is about. I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you that buying is always right, that everyone can buy, or that renting is always a mistake. There are real reasons people cannot buy: credit history, irregular income, location constraints, deposit gaps that are genuinely unbridgeable right now. What I am saying is this: the paths produce structurally different outcomes, and you deserve to understand that before you decide which one you're on. Scenario 1. Priya keeps renting. She continues saving in the lifetime ISA. She waits for the right time. Rent goes up. She adjusts. She maybe moves somewhere slightly cheaper when the lease ends. She lives her life, which by any measure is a good one. She never fully closes the deposit gap because the target keeps rising. By 45, she has accepted, quietly, that she's probably a lifetime renter. By 55, she's paid approximately £320,000 in rent and has the lifetime ISA, maybe £30,000 to £40,000 if she's been consistent. There is nothing shameful in this path, but it has a financial consequence that compounds over decades. Scenario 2. Priya buys at 33. She uses the lifetime ISA bonus to push her to a 10% deposit. She gets a mortgage. The monthly mortgage payment can be similar to or slightly less than her current rent. The first year is tight: the survey cost, the solicitor fees, the boiler that needs bleeding. But by year 3, she has equity. By year 10, she's remortgaged twice and is making meaningful inroads on the principal. By 55, her mortgage is within touching distance of paid off. She also has more control than she had as a tenant. In a house, she may be able to replace the boiler, insulate the walls, and improve the property when she chooses. In a leasehold flat, that control is more limited, because the building is managed collectively and the freeholder or management company may control major works. But even then, she has something the renter does not have: a legal stake in the asset. A home she cannot simply be asked to leave at the end of a tenancy. The gap between these two paths is not only discipline, it's not only financial sophistication. It's one structural decision, direction of travel made in year 1, if that path is genuinely available. Scenario 2 is harder to start. The deposit is a real barrier. The mortgage application is a real process. Service charges, repairs, major works, leasehold risk, transaction costs, and rate changes are real costs. But if the purchase is affordable, the building is sound, the lease is healthy, and she can hold the property long enough, the compounding can run in her favor instead of her landlord's. That matters. A lot. One rule: take it with you. Every rent payment builds someone else's wealth. Know whose. That's not an argument against renting. Sometimes renting is the right decision, the only decision, the best decision available to you right now. But it should be a conscious decision, not a default. Not something that happens to you because the deposit target is moving and the time never feels quite right, and somehow another year has passed. Know the cost. Know whose asset you're building. Know what that money is and isn't doing. And if there is a version of your life where you can change the direction of travel, make that version happen deliberately, not eventually, deliberately. We have a language problem in this country when it comes to renting. We call it the rental market. We talk about it as if it's a neutral mechanism. Supply, demand, price, nothing personal. But here is what I think long-term renting in Britain often becomes in 2026. Renting is a wealth transfer. Every month, it can move money from people who do not own housing assets to people who do. From people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, people who are working, contributing, trying, to people who bought property years or decades ago and are now collecting the rent that funds their retirement, their second home, their children's deposit. That is not an accusation. It does not mean every landlord is making easy money. Mortgage rates, repairs, tax changes, void periods, and regulation are real. But at the structural level, it is still a description. And the people on the paying end of that transfer are not there because they are feckless or uncommitted. They are there because they graduated into a market that had already moved away from them. Because the real wage growth over the last 20 years has not kept pace with property prices. Because the deposit required is now many multiples of what it was when their parents bought. They are not the new poor. They are something more specific and more troubling. They are the working housed. People who work hard, pay on time, and still cannot build wealth because the structure of housing in Britain is designed, however unintentionally, to make that impossible for a growing number of people. And when you understand that, you stop blaming yourself and you start making different decisions. I want to know something from you. After your rent, your council tax, your energy, your food, your travel, your child care if you have it, what does your actual monthly surplus look like? Not the theoretical budget you made on a spreadsheet 6 months ago. The real one. What actually lands in your account at the end of the month? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if the number you're looking at right now is smaller than it should be, the next video goes directly into what you do with it.